Hi, I'm Lexi Rodriguez, and I'm going to be doing a presentation on the test does not know best using Anderson and Oakes. So the main thesis and argument of both readings challenge the way we rely on standardized testing and tracking in education, and they both argue the flaws in the ways we measure someone's knowledge, as the way we currently measure someone's knowledge may not be accurately represented. Using different arguments made by Deborah Meyer and Lauren Anderson and Jeannie Oakes, I will be focusing on how standardized testing does not benefit students, and it is a way for giant corporations and businesses to profit, and the way students are turned into a statistic rather than focusing on their overall progress and intellect as a person. An argument by Deborah Meyer is standardized testing is deeply flawed as it reinforces inequality, does not accurately represent the measure of someone's true learning, shapes their public perception, policy, and funding with corporations, and it benefits corporate interests instead of benefiting the students, as all are influenced in the result of the test scores. But according to Lauren Anderson and Jeannie Oakes, standardized testing is also deeply flawed as it tracks students' ability and not overall knowledge, not accurately representing the measure of their true learning, unequal learning opportunities. It limits a student's potential and continues to reinforce social inequalities. The context, methods, and evidence. Meyer uses historical context to show narratives in the crisis in education, as it has persisted for decades, is used as a way to benefit businesses rather than the students, which corporations make billions designing tests alone. And it is No Child Left Behind policy is used as an example to explain the harm from high-stakes testing. And Anderson and Oakes use real-world examples in research to explain the disadvantage to marginalized students. As a subjective criteria, systematic bias and flaws in testing is highlighted as they make educational pathways rigid and limit someone's opportunities, as well as it is used as a way to benefit businesses rather than students, continuing on from the profit. But how exactly do businesses and corporations use this to their benefit? Making it harder for lower income schools to get more government funding, since the test scores remain low due to lack of resources and extra additional tutoring, which is often provided more to wealthier communities and schools. On top of this, it promotes privatization, which means when students don't excel in state and school tests, it promotes the creation of more charter and private schools, further profiting and benefiting companies, as many of these schools are run by for-profit companies, which promotes inequalities in education, as only those who can afford said schools will be able to attend, since tuitions are usually very high. And on top of this, companies often receive government funding when making these schools, allowing them to receive public money for private hands, which they continue to profit from, taking away from the point of schools, which is to help students grow and learn, and rather turning it into a way of making money. And connections to the course, we know that it promotes inequalities for low-income families, as low-income communities are less likely to receive government funding, preventing them from access to additional educational resources, making it easier for the more privileged. Inequalities from bias, which biased assessments which institutionalized inequalities. It mirrors corporate structure, as it is apparent that wealthier students are placed in more advanced jobs. Meanwhile, this is not the case for lower income students. And standardized tests reflect and reward middle and upper class knowledge rather than measuring the true intelligence or ability, ensuring that privileged students continue to succeed while marginalized students face systematic barriers. And it reproduces class division, which standardized testing is not a neutral way of measuring ability or intelligence, but instead reproduces class division, which the emphasis on testing shifts education away from critical thinking and more towards a skill-based learning that benefits employers rather than helping the creativity and independent thought of students. And as a way to reflect, personally, I believe standardized testing did not accurately represent my knowledge or ability to learn. We are taught to cram a whole bunch of information in at once, making it hard to actually learn. Instead, we're just remembering. And I believe tests are set up to test ability at remembering, not overall knowledge on a topic. I know many people close to me who do not excel in testing but are naturally intelligent. Something that stood out to me was Meyer's argument about how tests allows for a person to use their score to define their future, leaving some feeling unworthy or less than as a student, leaving them encouraged, which is not an accurate way of representing someone's ability, as tests are often high stakes and leaving a student stressed, unable to actually be able to focus, and rather to almost go in a fight or flight and just get through the test and finish it as fastly as you can, giving you a lower score. And sociologically, standardized testing and tracking is not a neutral measure of intelligence or ability, and rather reproduces social class divisions, maintains corporate interests, and limits educational equity, and it rather shapes a student's future in ways that reinforce systematic inequalities rather than challenging them. And on top of this, it contributes to overall stress level, as the reliance on standardized testing scores for determining school funding and evaluate teacher performance significantly elevates stress levels among both students and educators. It increases anxiety for the students, as the high stakes associated with the standardized testing can lead to high anxiety and stress among students. And students have shown that exhibited elevated cortisol levels during testing periods, and those most significant cortisol fluctuations lead to someone performing worse than expected, indicating that stress adversely affects test outcomes. And this especially puts pressure on lower class communities, as understanding that their performance directly influences school funding and resources placed an additional burden on the students, potentially keeping them from their max ability to perform educationally. And it also impacts job security for teachers, as if test scores remain low, it reflects the overall school's performance, which can cut funding, which can lead to schools being shut down. And some questions to ask yourself is, do you agree with the arguments made that standardized testing is not a fair way of measuring a student's progress? Why or why not? And how does a student's learning environment affect their opportunities or confidence?